Hello, everyone. Welcome to our discussion today on the changing landscape of the SD-WAN market. My name's Erica Powelson with the Dell'Oro Group, and this is one in a series of videos we're doing talking about COVID-19's impact on various industries and markets. Joining me today is Shin Umeda, who is a vice president and analyst at Dell'Oro Group. He has been with Dell'Oro for 20 years and was at multiple high-tech companies prior to that. So he has done a fair bit of forecasting in his time. And Shin, I know that you recently did a forecast report on this market. So tell us just kind of an overview of what you're going to discuss today.
Yeah, thanks, Erica. SD-WAN has been a pretty hot market for several years now, and 2019 was a breakthrough year for the market. Coming into 2020, we expected the momentum to continue, but of course, COVID-19 pandemic pretty much changed everything. So I thought for today's talk, I'd give an update on how the market is shaping up for the near term, and then speak some trends across the vendor landscape.
Okay, great. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Let me move us to a couple slides, and we'll come back after these.
Great. Yeah, so on the chart on the left, we're showing SD-WAN market revenue in the bars and the annual growth rates in the line. And in 2019, the market moved really through the early adopter stage, and we saw a big gain in the critical mass of users. The market grew about 60%, and that was the third consecutive year of growth. But with the coronavirus impacting, really the global economy, we saw a sharp decline across many enterprise networking markets. And SD-WAN, although it didn't decline, we saw a pretty steep drop in its growth rate. And because of that, we expect that to persist, and that this year will be a much lower growth rate. And as you can see on that chart, it's about a third of what it has been the past years, somewhere around 20%. We expect that businesses will defer their deployments of SD-WAN for a number of reasons. It might be supply chain related. There might be scarcity in resources and ability to get sites. But really, there's going to be a lack of visibility in the market and spending, and so that will affect the market negatively. But on the plus side, SD-WAN is a strategic and compelling technology, and we think that companies will continue to deploy that as part of their long-term strategies to move to this technology. The install base is pretty large now, so we expect that revenues will be pretty consistent, primarily because of the subscription licensing model that many of the SD-WAN vendors have. And lastly, I think the channel or the way the market for SD-WAN technologies is pretty diverse. We see a lot of enterprises deploying it by themselves, kind of in a do-it-yourself fashion. But we also see managed services being a pretty solid way to market, whether it's from telecom service providers, systems integrators, or VARs. It's really another way for SD-WAN to be deployed in the marketplace.
Okay, so based on those numbers you've just shared, how does this kind of change your vision for the evolution of SD-WAN technologies?
Well, I think first and foremost, SD-WAN is based on software, so that really kind of changes the trajectory of how the market or how the technology can be developed. I think one of the primary areas that we see of technology evolving is integration of network security capabilities. That has really become a way that companies can differentiate. Another area where we can see this technology evolving is towards the interoperability of cloud services. SD-WAN is really a technology that enables more efficient use of cloud services. So definitely an area where we see growing interoperability with the many different cloud service providers out in the marketplace.
Okay, all right, let's go. Let's take a quick look, our next slide on the vendor landscape.
Right. So, I think on this slide here, we've got a number of things happening, but we start on the left-hand side here, this box showing a pretty long list of SD-WAN vendors. There's about 50 in that list, and I'm sure that there are actually more in the marketplace today. But I guess the real question is this industry or is this market big enough to support so many vendors? It's hard to predict what will happen, but I think as we kind of move to the middle of the slide, we could see some indications of how this market is really consolidating and concentrating rather around a relatively small number of vendors. From a market share perspective, in 2019, just a hair over 3/4 of the market was concentrated in just 8 vendors. So I think that's a real indicator of how this industry might be moving. Something to note about the vendor shares is that none of those vendors actually had more than 20% market share. So I think there is some opportunity for some vendor shifting, but I think on the other side of things, I wouldn't expect the top number of vendors to expand or change dramatically. We'll see some things moving, vendors moving in and out of the list, but I don't expect that that list will change dramatically. As we move to the right, I think a clear trend that we expect to accelerate would be industry consolidation. I've listed here 4 fairly significant acquisitions that have occurred. The most recent one just last month or this month. But I'm not sure it's easy to predict how mergers and acquisitions will occur. And I think that really the consolidation could happen in many ways. The pandemic is really putting a pressure on economic conditions. So I wouldn't be surprised to see vendors either de-emphasize their solution, perhaps even downsize or even terminate their SD-WAN businesses or at least their developments. It's just not, the conditions just won't be favorable for a lot of vendors, particularly smaller vendors who may not have the economic resources.
Okay, great. Let's just make sure you've pointed out your contact info here.
Right, yeah, so you can see on here my email address, shin@dell'oro.com, is a way you can get a hold of me or contact me if you're interested in more information about what we've talked about in SD-WAN or have some specific questions perhaps that I can address.
Okay, great. So all of that, obviously not the numbers you or anybody would have wanted, but certainly more positive long-term growth than I think what some people might have expected. So that is great. What do you want people to take away from this video? Just making sure if they remember nothing else, what do you want them to remember about the SD-WAN market?
Sure. What we've talked about today, right? SD-WAN really is a compelling solution, and in the world that's moving to cloud-based services, it's really a technology that enables that. Second, software is really the basis of SD-WAN, so it is a technology that we think is going to expand and evolve in many directions in the coming years. And lastly, the last slide we talked about was industry consolidation accelerating. I think, the pandemic has put some pressure on the market, and as a result, I think we would expect to see perhaps a little more consolidation in the very near term.
Okay. We've got different reports and articles that Shin has put into the attachment section. So click there, find those. As he said, follow up with him. He gave you his contact information, and you can also obviously always find him at the Dell'Oro website. And thanks for joining us today. Be sure to look for our other videos that are discussing the COVID-19 impact on the markets that you care about.